There we go. All right. Question. What's the connection? So the title of tonight's class is Purim and the Nuremberg trials, right? You're familiar with the Nuremberg trials, right? What's the connection between Purim and the Holocaust?
Genocide.
They both wanted, there was both a theme of let's kill the Jews, definitely. Any other?
Difficult to see God's hand in dark times.
Okay. Yep. What's interesting is, and a lot of people don't necessarily know this about the Purim story, but you read the Megillah, and the Purim story actually took place over 9 years. Now, if you look back at the past 9 years of your life, right, like so much happens, right? So if you can imagine, like over a 9 year period, a lot happens, and you wouldn't necessarily see the themes that are running through it. Right now, we sit down and we read the Megillah, and perhaps we can see the themes, especially if we read it with intention. But if you were living through the times, would you have necessarily connected the fact that, the incident of Vashti being killed with with the Jews being saved? You would have thought Vashti being killed had nothing to do with the Jews, right? So it was difficult to see God's hand in it. Okay, keep that question in mind, and I want to tell you a very strange custom, no longer practiced, but the Medrash talks about it, and it says that the Hasidim in France, right? Now, when it talks about the Hasidim in France, does anyone know what Hasidic Jews are? That's not what it's talking about, right? Because does anyone know what Hasid, the Hebrew word for a Hasidic person, the literal translation is? So it actually means a pious person, right? And the definition of a pious person is someone who goes above and beyond, right? We have people who try and follow the letter of the law, and then there are people who try and do above that, right? So they really focus their life on going above and beyond. That sort of person is called a pious person. So the pious people in France, they had a very strange custom, is that when they died, they would bury themselves, they would ask to be buried in their dining room table, right? So they would, thank you, that was a great reaction. Right? They would ask for their dining room table to be taken apart and used as the coffin. Why? Why on earth?
Was it the place for gathering, like on Shabbat, and that was where the family came, and that was, something about, what is the saying that the Jews don't keep Shabbat, the Shabbat keeps the Jews?
Right. So the saying is, and I forget who said it, is that more than the Jews keep the Shabbat keeps the Jews, right? Which is saying that as much as it's a Jew's responsibility, it's a Jewish people's responsibility to uphold the sanctity of Shabbat, the Shabbat actually upholds the Jewish people, right? Because it's so integral to who we are as a Jewish people. Okay, so it's perhaps something about Shabbat, a gathering table, place. You're still like, perhaps.
I don't know what else.
Okay.
Unless they like the wood.
Well, I guess keeping with the theme of Shabbat, that's the allegory is made that our table is like the Mishkan, that we're representing in the same way that the Jews did in the temple, right? Our table sort of representing that or substituting for that.
Okay, so that's a beautiful point, is that the hello. Yeah, we have one right there.
There's always one chair for me.
That's it. We keep it for you. We wouldn't want you to stand or bring your own chair, right? And interestingly enough, you're right by the 2 bottles of wine. So and the chocolate. There we go. It's worthwhile coming late, right? We like to encourage like lateness and right. I'm joking, but where are we up to? Okay, so Julie was just telling us that perhaps there's a comparison between our dining room tables, which is compared to in the temple, the Mizbeach, right, where the kinds of the sacrifices were. So I want to tell you an interesting anecdote, an interesting point that's connected somewhat to that, which might help the question and might make it stronger. Who knows? So in Emor, Parashat Emor, the Torah talks about all of the festivals, right? Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot, and then immediately afterwards, it goes into two separate mitzvot. It talks about the mitzvah of lighting the menorah in the temple, and then it talks about the lechem hapanim. What were the lechem hapanim? They were the showbreads that were in the temple. And what they were was the Kohanim would put them in on Friday, they would stay fresh to the following Friday, and then they would eat them, right? So usually in the Torah, when something is put together with something else that isn't chronological, it begs the question, why are these two topics related, right? Like, you're putting the text about all the festivals. Okay, we understand that, but what does lighting menorah have to do next to it? And what does the Lechem Hapanim have to do next to that? So the rabbis explain that the reason why it is because there are the festivals from the Torah, and on top of that, there are two rabbinic festivals as well. And the Torah is alluding to these two rabbinic festivals in these two different concepts. What are the rabbinic festivals? Purim and Hanukkah. Okay, so what could possibly the menorah be alluding to, hinting to?
Miracles.
Right, and which festival? Hanukkah. Yeah, that one's a pretty straightforward, right? We understand that. Okay, menorah, Hanukkah, yes, we get it. Lechem hapanim, what's the connection between the lechem hapanim, the showbreads, and Purim? And I don't think you'll get it at all.
Is it the soda, like the meal?
So that's the first kind of connection that comes to mind, but it's a bit
That you're
Pulling
waiting for a week, and only after a week, eating
okay.
the time frame, my friend. This is like long stuff.
Possibly.
Is it that they stay fresh for a week too, right? So like there's like this hidden miracle that like why did they stay fresh? Because like I don't right, like wasn't it like after you took them out, it was like still like it was like a fresh.
Yes, they were still fresh.
Is that his miracle? And the hidden miracle of Hashem with the Torah, what is that?
It could be. I mean, it's a hard thing to kind of try and figure out. Like, what has this got to do with the miracle of the Purim story? So the Medrash, the Gemara, tells a story. It tells a story and explains what the connection is. So it says what was the first miraculous piece in the Purim story? Like, if you read through the Purim story, and I don't know how many of us are all familiar with the Purim story right now, what's kind of the first thing that would make us go, that's weird?
That Esther was chosen to be.
Actually, earlier on, there are weird things going on even before that.
Killing of Vashti.
The killing of Vashti, right? So what happens? Achashverosh calls for Vashti to come, and he wanted her to come naked, and he wanted to parade her in front of everyone, right? Apparently, Vashti had spots or whatever, and she absolutely refused to come. Achashverosh was drunk, very drunk, and he was enraged, right? His wife dead, disobey him. So he asked 7 of his advisors for advice, right? What do I do with my wife who refuses to come? So each one gives advice. The final one, his name was Memuchan, a character that we meet later on in the Megillah under a different name, Haman, right? Gives a piece of advice, and he says to her, your wife refused to come? You should kill her. And Achashverosh says, great idea. Let's go do that.
And all the rest of them were like, no, right?
Yeah, but like,
chill out.
I mean, it's a solution, but it solves more problems than it. In fact, we're told the next morning he wakes up, he sobers up a little bit, and he's like, "Where's my wife?" Right? and they tell him you killed him, and he's like distraught, like now what, right? So I mean, it was crazy, right? Um, um, and incidentally, what the Gemara says is parallel to this story taking place on earth. There was a story taking place in heaven. What was this story in heaven? Was that the angels knew that there was going to be a decree to annihilate the Jews, right? And parallel to each of the advisors giving their piece of advice, one angel went up to God and begged for the Jews to be saved, right? None of them kind of managed to convince God to save the Jews until the final one, right? And the Gemara goes through each of the 7 advisors and relates how the name of the advisor related to something that they were praying for, right? They were saying to God, let's say, for example, they would say to God, like, I'll show you, right, with Memuchan, right? So his name was Memuchan, and the angels prayed to God and they said, oh, is there any other nation that Muchan means, any Hebrew speakers in the room? Oh, there we go. Muchan. Muchan means to prepare, ready, right? Is there any other nation that prepares a table for you? Right? And at that point, God says, I'm going to save the Jews, gives Memuchan this crazy idea to kill Vashti. Achashverosh agrees to it, which paves the way for Esther to become queen, which paves the way for Mordecai to get in there with Esther and Esther to have this party where she can invite Haman, Achashverosh, and beg for the Jews saving, right? Now, what's so special about this table? What does this table symbolize that's so special? Let's stop for a second. If I had to ask you, what's unique about the Jews? And let's go around the table and everyone can share what you think is unique about the Jewish people. What makes Jews unique and special? I would say, should I go first? Someone else wants to go first. I would say that I've lived in like a ton of different places, a lot of us as well, right? You meet a Jew, you connect with them, right? We care about each other, regardless of what our background is. Yes, we fight like siblings, right? But but I've traveled to Norway and to Las Vegas and to all sorts of places in between. You meet a Jew, right, and you bagel each other, right? We just connect with each other. We're family, right? That's one of the things if I was one of the angels, I would say, come on, look how they care for each other, right? What would you say? Let's go around and I'm curious to hear.
Yeah, sense of humor, even
Okay.
when it is difficult times.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is part of our resilience, right?
That we really uplift everything, live consciously. We whine, we say a prayer over, and yeah.
Okay, beautiful.
It's like we're ancient, but we have these continuous laws that we've always had. We've always had the Torah.
Ancient and timeless.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
We believe in God.
We believe in God, yeah.
Our community.
Community.
Going back to a little bit what you said, like we always distinguish ourselves because it's very strange to tell people that you have to be home at exactly 4:57, not 4:58, not 4:53. You walk around, you build a house outside of your house during certain times of the year, and you walk, it's a very strange from the outside. Spencer always says, like, it doesn't look normal, so we purposely, I think, separate ourselves. When we follow all, the halachas, we make this thing around us that we're a little bit different.
And that's what Haman actually said about the Jews. There's this nation that's set apart from the rest of them. Bugged him. Yeah. Hello. Perfect timing. Yeah, come time. We're just gonna put up another chair, but I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you.
We're gonna grab a chair. we're just going around and sharing what we think is special about the Jews. Julie, yeah.
I would say our almost compulsion to be dedicated to social justice. We're certainly, sense of community and looking out for each other, but that extends to caring for those that need help even outside of our community.
There's a disproportionate number of Jews that are involved in all social causes, right? They're yeah, you're right. And it comes from a thank you so much. I think it comes from our neshama, right? Our soul. We know as Jews that we're here for a higher purpose, right? So what would you say? What's yes, we're passing that around. Thank you.
Wow, glad I came.
Think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 glasses. Right? I mean, please come early, right? But what would you say is sets the Jews aside? Special, unique about the Jews?
You can say any of our answers. I'm just kidding.
Well, you can. You didn't hear it.
Um, I don't know why this comes to mind. I guess I'm reading a lot of Tehillim lately. But not necessarily social justice, but any kind of justice, the belief that there is justice and good will be rewarded and bad gets its recompense, and just having security that whether it's short term or extraordinarily long term, there's justice. There exists this concept of holy justice.
Yeah, and the sense of right and wrong, right?
Yeah, with a
Beautiful.
sense of right and wrong that comes. Yeah.
Okay, great. None of you gave the same answer as that angel in heaven who said, they set for you a table. Does anyone else? What's so special about a table? Think about your table at home. Thank you.
Well, I think isn't it supposed to be like our table is not like the Mishkan, it's we basically create our home to be like a mini Beis HaMikdash. So
Right.
it's like a very important center of the home.
So what happens around that table?
We welcome people. Abraham.
Right. So what kind of people do we welcome around our table?
Well, I mean, I tend to have the Mortons, but.
Anyone else?
Jews.
What? I mean, we're missing something. I'm assuming in between when the Mortons
The
come,
angels.
there's
There's
other people that there's the angels.
That don't have places to go.
Family, of
Yes,
course.
people that yes, exactly, right.
I never stay at the table, that's the problem.
They're like eating challah and then they leave. We don't.
Forget about it. I remember when we lived in Calgary, right? It was the first time we lived in a house. We moved from Berlin where we were living in an apartment. We had a house, we had a basement, right? Fantastic. What do you build in a basement when you have young kids?
Playroom.
A playroom. What never gets used in the basement when you have young kids? The playroom. Why? Where are the kids?
Everywhere else.
Hanging out in the kitchen,
Yeah.
right? Under your feet, right? Or whatever, around the table. We think about it and you're thinking, oh, we host the Mortons. I was going to say forget about the Mortons, but don't forget about the Mortons. Don't forget about the Mortons, but like think about how much kindness we do around our own table with our own, right? The food that we serve, the time that we just spend chatting to each other, right? The values that get learned, right? We talk about Shabbat tables, and yes, it's beautiful to open up our home to other people and other guests. And don't forget how beautiful it is what we create for ourselves, right? For our things. So when the angel went up to heaven and said to God and said, save the Jews because they set aside a table for you. He's referring to the lechem hapanim, right? Which again is this bread, right? And I think it's that point that Rachel so kindly, so beautifully put together is that we elevate everything, right? You drink wine, you eat chocolate, you make a blessing, right? You're mindful of it. Like that chocolate, I pick it up. Thank you, God. you gave me this delicious piece of chocolate to help me deal with today, right? You know, like we can elevate everything, and nothing symbolizes that more than our plain, boring dining room table, right? I think about, you know, the dining room table. We lived in Manchester for 6 years, and we bought a table secondhand. And then when we were leaving, we were like, okay, time to sell it, right? Like, what's the value of a table, secondhand table that you sell again? Couple $100, right? But if you take the value of the stuff that has been done around that table, what's the value of that, right? What's the value of a Shabbat meal that we spend together? Right? We say the Birchat Hamazon, we listen to our kids, we open our home to friends, we open our home to someone that needs that place, right? What's the value of that? Is there a value that we can put on that?
No.
No, it's priceless, right? It's like that old MasterCard ad. Do you remember it, right? Like, cost of this, no, the cost of that.
Mhm.
Priceless, right? It literally is priceless. And why did those pious people in France want to be buried in their dining room tables as caskets? Is because they understood this, right? They understood that the dining room table kind of represents the essence of who we are. Yes, it's nice to have guests around it, right? But the dining room table sees our best, sees our worst, right? It sees how much we care, how much we in things, and it also sees, you know, how much we struggle to grow and get better. And they live this, right? That we are constantly here to give to others, to do kindness, to elevate the mundane, and that's what we take with us, right? We don't take our money. We don't take our cars, we don't take our houses, we don't take our stature in the community. The only thing we take are the good deeds and the internal work that we work on ourselves. And they wanted specifically to take the dining room table more than, let's say, the talent, right? That they things, because yeah, everyone recognizes that it's holy to pray. But do we all recognize the holiness inherent in the dining room table, right? The holiness inherent of taking a moment and asking someone, how are you? And actually waiting to hear what the answer is. We don't always do it, but that's what a pious person they did, is that they went over and above, and every single thing was an opportunity for them to go above and beyond, right? And to bring that holiness into their day to day. And that's why when the angels came up and said, they prepare for you a table, right? What they're saying is, look at the way they eat, right? Look at the way they stop, they pause, they make a blessing, they remember that it's a gift from you. Look at the way they share their food with others, whether it's your own family, right? Whether it's guests, right? Look at the way they elevate the mundane. And when they said that, God says, yes, I'm going to save the Jewish people, right? We see this theme of elevating the mundane in another way. And I'm going to share with you the most incredible chilling story. You may have heard it before, but I doubt you've heard all the details, even if you've heard it. So, there's another medrash that's told that when Jacob, our forefather Jacob, was shown the entire Jewish history, right? From his time until the end of time, until Messiah comes. He's seeing all the Jewish history, and at some point he cries and begs God, and he says to God that please don't let Germania fulfill their desires. Now, when you hear that phrase, what do you think? Germany, why Germany? The Holocaust, right? 250 years ago, there was a rabbi called Rabbi Yaakov Emden, right? And he heard this, he's learning this, and what does he say? Because remember, this was before the Holocaust. This was when Germany was a cultured nation, right? Where no one would have thought that they were capable of such depravity, such cruelty, right? He says this is referring to Germany. People didn't really understand what he meant. Fast forward, the Holocaust happens. And people understand now what Rabbi Yaakov Emden is saying is that Jacob, our forefather Jacob saw this, saw the horrific what was going to happen in the Holocaust, and he prayed to God that God, please don't let them fulfill everything they want to do, right? On October 16th, 1946, was the Nuremberg trials, right? The night before, there were 11 Nazis that were sentenced to be hung, right? The night before, one of them, who was Goering, he hung himself, right? So on the day of October 14th, of October 16th, there were 10 Nazis that were executed. One of them was called Julius Streicher. Has anyone heard of him? What do you know about him? So if you stop for a second and think about it, right? How were the Nazis able to get such support to kill the Jews in such horrific ways and en masse?
That's a hard question.
It's a very-
Yeah.
I think they knew a lot about Jews, actually. I think they're very knowledgeable.
Enter Julius Streicher. What was he? He was the head, the brain, the mastermind behind the Nazi propaganda machine, right? And as Rachel said, he knew a tremendous amount about the Jews. He was very smart, very intellectual, and very well researched about the Jews. And he built an incredible Nazi propaganda machine that was able to gain a lot of support for his anti-Semitism and for his plans. He's one of the 10 Nazis. Just before he's killed, he yells out, Purim Fest 1946. Right? I see some smiles. Anyone knows what he's referring to?
The sons of Haman.
Right. So he was extremely well researched and knew a lot about the Jews. And the parallel is 10 sons of Haman, 10 Nazis, right? Really, they were supposed to be 11, 10 Nazis, right? But here's the crazy thing. If you look in the Megillah, there are 4 letters. When it lists the 10 sons of Haman, there's one letter that's written bigger, which is a Vav. And there are 3 letters that are written smaller, Tov, Shin, and Zayin. And for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, no one knew why. Why are these 3 letters written smaller in the Megillah? No one knew. That year, the Belzer Rebbe said, you know why these letters are written smaller? Tov, Shin, Zayin is Tov, each letter has a numerical value. Tov is 400, Shin is 300, Zayin is 7, right? It's 707. And the Vav, which is bigger, refers to the 6th millennia, which means which is the way we write the Hebrew year, right? Because when we write the Hebrew year, we don't write the millennia. We just kind of write like instead of writing, let's say 57, the Hebrew year of 1946 was 5707, right? But in Hebrew, we would just write it Tov Shin Zayin, right? So those 3 letters were written small for years and years and years. No one could understand, and that was the year when the 10 Nazis Nuremberg trials were executed, parallel to the 10 sons of Haman. Story doesn't end there yet, though, right? Because the October 16th was that year fell out on the holiday of Hoshana Rabbah. Hoshana Rabbah is the last day of Sukkot. What does the festival of Sukkot celebrate? Does anyone know? Yes. Anything else?
Traveling through the desert.
Traveling through the desert. And anything, what specifically about traveling through the desert? Right. So when the Jews traveled through the desert, we had the Ananei HaKavod, right, which were the clouds of glory, right? Now, what happens? What happened before that? The Ananei HaKavod, the clouds of glory, is the Jews were at Sinai. They received the Torah, right? Spiritual high. They saw God. It was incredible. What happens next? Sorry?
They study? No, they faint.
They faint and then they get up, they hear the next 10 commands, they hear all the 10 commands. What happens next? They sin with the golden calf, right? just now, I want you to, if you've heard the story before, you haven't heard the story before, I don't care, right? What I want you to do is imagine that you're hearing the story for the first time and try and put yourself in that position, right? Try and imagine here you are, a Jew who came out of Egypt, saw these incredible miracles, saw God split the sea, right? Witnessed God talking to you, giving you the Ten Commandments in this most miraculous, world-stopping way. And then you mess up by sinning at the golden calf. How great do you feel about yourself right now?
Well, the women didn't, so technically we were good, right? At least I was a man.
Yeah. Yeah, put yourself as a man. How great do you feel?
You're terrible.
Pretty terrible. And I want to tell you something, as a woman, I mean, we're really good at taking responsibility for things that aren't our fault, so we would probably also feel pretty bad, right? So, right? So, I mean, we feel like, how close do you feel to God at that point? You imagine someone that you love and that loves you, gives you an incredible present, and you lose it, you break it carelessly, right? You feel pretty lousy, right? The Ananei HaKavod was God's gift to the Jewish people, right? Where he told them, yes, I know you messed up in a pretty big way, but I always want you. I always want that relationship with you, right? And that's what Hoshana Rabbah comes to tell us as well, right? That we all have our journey, right? We all have those times where we feel more connected, and we all have those times where we feel less connected, and we all have those things that we feel good about. We all have those things that we feel not so good about, right? But the theme again and again and again is that God wants that relationship with us. And sometimes we see it in our life, and sometimes we don't see it so clearly. Again, let's try and put ourselves in the morale of the Jews post-Holocaust, right? It must have been, the Jews post-Holocaust must have been at an all-time low, the morale of the Jews, right? And what happens is on Hoshana Rabbah, on the festival that celebrates God saying, I want a relationship with you. I am going to protect you in these protective clouds, even after you've messed up. We have a tiny, tiniest glimmer of justice, right? A tiny, tiny glimmer of, look, the guy who spearheaded that Nazi propaganda is recognizing that God is running the world, right? He's recognizing that just like God took saved the Jews, right, in the Purim story, right, and didn't allow the perpetrators to go unpunished. God is doing that again, right? It's that tiniest sliver of I'm still here for you. I've still got your back, right? Does it make it all like, oh, easy? No, right? But it's that tiniest sliver of, yes, the Jews as a nation have just been through the most horrific time. And we don't know why, right? We don't know why these things happen. What we do know is that there is a God, right, who loves us and cares about us and who's moving the world along towards its plan for world history, right? And we see these tiny slivers of it. That's what Purim celebrates, right? You look through the Megillah, you read through the Megillah, there isn't a single mention of God's name. It's the only book of the 24 written books of Tanakh that doesn't mention God's name at all, right? You could read through it and it could read like, oh, that's an interesting story. And you could not connect the dots, right? But if you connect the dots, you see like, whoa, Haman said, kill your wife, and he got away with that? Wow. Esther, of all the women that were Ahasuerus had to choose from, becomes the new queen, right? Like all these crazy things, right? Mordecai happens to overhear this plot to kill the king. He happens to save the king's life. The king happens to forget to give him a reward, and he's only remembers to give him a reward on the night when Haman comes to him and asks him, can I kill, and is about to ask him, can I kill Mordecai? Right? Like all these tiny little like coincidences which we could so easily pass over are those glimpses, right, of God showing us that, yes, I'm here for you, right? And yes, we can't always see it, right, in our lives. Sometimes we don't see it for years and years and years, and sometimes we don't see it in our life at all, right? But the knowledge of knowing that there is a God, right, that it is looking out for us and is moving us closer to where the world needs to be is sometimes just a little sliver of comfort of what we can do. And this is really what that incredible connection between the Nuremberg trials and the Purim, which is pointed out incidentally by like one of the biggest enemies of the Jews, right? Julius Streicher. He's the one that yells Purim Fest 1946, right? At a time which reminds us that God wants us a relationship, shows us that God is there and looking out for us. And I think it also can kind of help us understand how, just like, God is there for us in the mundane, right? Like the little things, like telling Haman, like Haman getting away with suggesting to kill Ahasuerus, right? So too, we bring God into our lives in the little things, right? The way we conduct our homes, right? The way, chesed, kindness is a hallmark of the Jewish people, right? You mentioned it. I can't remember if anyone else mentioned it. And it's not just about the big things, right? We all have so many opportunities to just do something kind, say something kind, right, to other people. And that's really one of the things that really distinguishes us as a people is that we take whatever it is in our lives, right? We take whatever opportunities that we have and we elevate them, right? We bring that holiness, that spark into whatever we do. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions, any thoughts, any comments?
Would you argue that maybe it was an angel that told him to say that? That's just really weird. That Julius Caesar, like, what's his name? Julius Streicher.
You can call him Julius.
Julius Caesar. Whatever his name is, it's the one I'm talking. That just seems so weird to me, like that you would just connect the, I don't know. I just think that's so weird, like that you would. say
It's
that.
definitely, I mean, it's definitely could be. It is, and it's ironic, right? Like it's one thing if we kind of look at it, but and say, oh, 10 something stuff, come on, 10 Nazis, right?
Mhm.
But for him to recognize
It's just
that,
weird. I
it's
wish we could,
chilling.
like, study his brain, so now, why did you say this? Like, wait, hold on a second.
Right.
So, I mean, it also just shows how knowledgeable he was, like,
Yeah.
like almost eerily, like probably knew more than a lot of Jews did.
Yeah. Yeah, he probably did know a lot more than a lot of Jews, and he obviously knew about the 10 sons of Ham.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean,
I mean, he also is referring it's failed genocide though, like Haman failed, the Nazis failed. We're
Yeah.
still here.
but he still knew that story, like, I mean,
But yeah,
it's crazy, like, not a lot of.
And they both died by hanging, like, right? They were both
Yeah.
killed by hanging as well. And it really was supposed to be 11 Nazis, right? Had Goring not killed himself the night before,
Well,
he would have,
was suicide in Farm Story too, that there was a daughter.
yes,
sister.
Haman's daughter.
And it's alluded to also in the Megillah that if you read it chronologically, it doesn't make sense at the very end. I'm not so knowledgeable to be able to say it off the top of my head, but it's something that, telling the story and the sons were hanged on the gallows. And then this and this and this happened. And then the sons were hanged on the gallows.
Oh, it says it.
And it says
Yes.
it twice, like the second time it repeats it, but wait a minute, that already happened like 3 days before or something like that.
Right.
And, it's been explained that that is an allusion to the Nuremberg.
Interesting.
hangings.
Very interesting.
So, yeah, I heard that from Age Discovery. Yeah. Ages ago. Yeah, cool.